She set the table for 6, placed the golden brown roast in the exact center of the lace tablecloth, and poured the red wine into crystal glasses that caught the flicker of the candlelight. From my window across the street, framing my view through the frost and the falling snow, it looked like a painting from a forgotten era, a masterpiece of domestic perfection that belonged in a museum rather than a lonely house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The streets were silent, buried under inches of fresh white powder, the kind of silence that amplifies the beating of your own heart. I watched her move with a slow, deliberate grace, her silhouette distinct against the warm, amber glow of her dining room. She adjusted a napkin, she straightened a fork. She stood back and admired her work, her hands clasped together in what looked like prayer or perhaps just nervous anticipation. But I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut that felt like swallowing ice, that the doorbell would never ring. I knew that the steam rising from that turkey would fade into cold grease, that the wine would turn sour in the glass, and that the candles would burn down to nothing but wax pools on the mahogany. She had prepared a feast for ghosts. And the most terrifying part wasn't the loneliness. It was the fact that she checked her wristwatch, looked at the empty chairs, and smiled as if the room were already full of laughter. That smile broke me. It was the smile of someone who had decided to reject reality entirely. I thought she didn't recognize the truth of her isolation, but I was wrong. I was so wrong. She wasn't waiting for the living. She was waiting for a memory so strong it had manifested physically in that room, and tonight I was about to walk right into the middle of it. I am not usually the kind of man who stares into his neighbor's windows. My name is Liam, and I moved to this neighborhood 6 months ago to escape the noise of the city, to find a quiet place to write, and perhaps to run away from a family history I didn't want to confront. The house across the street, number 42, had always been a source of quiet fascination for me. It was a grand old Victorian, slightly peeling paint, surrounded by an overgrown garden that whispered of better days. The owner, Mrs. Calloway, was a figure of mystery. I had seen her only in passing, collecting the mail, watering the hydrangeas with a vacant expression, always dressed in clothes that seemed decades out of date. We had exchanged polite nods, the universal currency of suburban disconnect, but never words. Tonight, however, the distance between our houses felt insurmountable and yet non-existent. I was alone, nursing a glass of bourbon, avoiding calls from my mother, avoiding the cheerful chaos of the holidays. Mrs. Calloway was alone too, but she was performing a ritual. The contrast was maddening. Why cook for 6? Why polish the silver? The clock on my wall ticked loudly, marking the passing of time. 6:30, 7, 7:30. No cars pulled into her driveway, no taxis stopped. The streetlights buzzed on, illuminating the untouched snow on her walkway. Not a single footprint led to her door. The scene inside her dining room remained frozen, a tableau of waiting. I could see her sitting at the head of the table now. She wasn't eating. She was just sitting, her posture rigid, looking at the empty chair opposite her. She was talking. I couldn't hear the words through the double glazing of our windows and the howling wind outside, but I saw her lips moving. She was animating a conversation with thin air, nodding, laughing softly, gesturing with a hand that trembled slightly. It wasn't the behavior of someone senile. It was too focused, too specific. It looked like a séance. The urge to intervene started as a whisper and grew into a shout in my mind. It wasn't pity. Pity is looking down on someone. This was something else, a magnetic pull, a sense of shared tragedy. I felt that if I didn't go over there, something irrevocable would happen. The candle flames in her window seemed to be dancing violently now, casting long, distorted shadows against her walls. I put down my bourbon. I grabbed my coat. The decision was made before I even zipped the jacket. I needed to know who those 5 empty chairs were for. I needed to know why a woman would break her own heart with such elaborate precision. Stepping out into the cold was a shock to the system. The wind bit at my face, stinging my eyes, but I kept my gaze fixed on her window. Crossing the street felt like crossing a timeline, moving from the modern, cynical world into something older and heavier. The snow crunched loudly under my boots, a sound that seemed too aggressive for the silence of the night. I walked up her driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Up close, the house loomed over me, breathing a scent of old wood and pine needles. I stood on the porch, my hand hovering over the brass knocker. Through the sheer curtains of the window next to the door, I saw her clearly. She looked fragile, her skin like parchment paper, her white hair pinned up in an elegant bun. She was raising a glass to the empty chair on her right. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. The sound echoed inside the house, shattering the illusion she had built. I expected her to be startled. I expected fear or confusion, or for the lights to go out as she hid from the intruder. But she didn't jump. Mrs. Calloway turned her head slowly toward the door, her expression unreadable. She stood up, smoothing her dress, a deep velvet green, festive and mournful all at once, and walked toward the entrance. When the door opened, a wave of heat and the smell of roasted meat, sage and expensive perfume washed over me. It was intoxicating. It smelled like the Christmas of childhood, the kind you see in movies but never actually experience. She looked at me. Her eyes were a piercing, cloudy blue, and for a second, she didn't see Liam, the neighbor. She saw someone else. Her face softened, and a look of immense, painful relief washed over her features. "You're late," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "I was beginning to worry the snow had caught you." I froze. I should have corrected her. I should have said, "Mrs. Calloway, it's Liam from across the street. I was just checking on you." But the desperation in her eyes stopped me. It was a trap, and I walked right into it. "I'm sorry," I found myself saying, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "The roads were bad." She smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look 20 years younger. Come in, don't let the cold inside. Everyone is waiting." Everyone. The word hung in the air as I stepped into the foyer. The house was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the corners of the high ceilings. The floorboards creaked under my weight, announcing my presence to the empty house. She led me down the hallway, past portraits of people I didn't know, stern men in suits, women in wedding dresses, children playing in sepia-toned gardens. We reached the dining room, and the reality of the scene hit me harder than the view from the window. It was perfect, terrifyingly perfect. The table was set with heavy silverware, fine china with gold rims and crystal goblets. There were 6 places, 1 at the head, where she had been sitting, 1 at the foot, 2 on each side. The food was steaming, untouched, a turkey glazed and golden, bowls of mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, green beans with almonds. It was enough food for a battalion, yet there was only her, and now me. "Sit," she commanded gently, pointing to the chair at the foot of the table directly opposite her. "You know that's your place. It always has been." I moved toward the chair, feeling like an actor who had walked onto the wrong stage but didn't know how to exit. As I pulled the heavy wooden chair out, my eyes fell on the place setting. There was a small handwritten card on the plate, elegant calligraphy, black ink on heavy cream cardstock. I squinted to read the name, expecting to see a stranger's name, or perhaps husband, or son. The name on the card was Lucas. I stared at it. My middle name is Lucas, a coincidence surely. Lucas is a common name, but then I looked at the place setting to my right. The card read, Eleanor, my grandmother's name. I looked to the left, Robert, my father's name. My blood ran cold. The heat of the room suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. My heart began to race, a drum solo of panic in my chest. How could she know? I had never spoken to this woman beyond a greeting. I'd never told anyone in this neighborhood my middle name, let alone the names of my estranged father or my deceased grandmother. I looked up at Mrs. Calloway. She was pouring wine into my glass, her hand steady now. "I made your favorite," she said, nodding toward the stuffing. "With the chestnuts, just how you like it. I don't even like chestnuts, but my father did. My father loved them." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Mrs. Calloway," I started, my voice trembling. "How do you know these names?" She stopped pouring. She set the bottle down with a soft clink. She looked at me, her eyes drilling into mine, stripping away the layers of polite, neighborly distance. "Names?" she asked, tilting her head. "These aren't just names, dear. These are the people who broke us. And tonight we are going to talk about why they aren't here." The atmosphere shifted instantly from melancholic to menacing. The coziness of the Christmas dinner evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. This wasn't a senile woman confusing me for a relative. This was something far more deliberate. She knew who I was, she knew my lineage, and she had been waiting for me to cross the street. I looked around the table again at the other empty chairs. There were two more names I hadn't checked yet, the one to her right and the one to her left. I leaned forward, needing to see. The card to her right read, "Margaret." My mother. The woman who was currently calling my phone. The woman I was ignoring, and the card to her left. It was turned slightly away from me. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the final card. Mrs. Calloway smiled, but there was no warmth in it this time, only a bitter, tragic knowledge. "That," she said softly, "is the reason you are here. That is the secret your family buried." "But the snow uncovers everything eventually, doesn't it?" She sat down slowly, picked up her napkin, and unfolded it. "Eat," she ordered, "before it gets cold. We have a long night ahead of us, and you need your strength for the truth." I sat there, paralyzed. The smell of the food was nauseating now. I was trapped in a room with a woman who held the keys to a history I didn't know I had. I looked at the final card again. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and turned it so I could read the name. The name on the card was Evelyn, Mrs. Calloway's first name. But under it, in smaller letters, was a date. December 24th, 1984, my birth date. I stared at the numbers, my mind reeling, trying to make the math work, trying to understand the impossible connection. I was born on Christmas Eve. I knew that. But why was her name associated with my birth? Why was she sitting at the head of a table set for my entire family, living and dead? "I see you're confused," she said, cutting a slice of turkey with surgical precision. "They told you it was a complicated birth, didn't they? That your mother almost died, that it was a miracle you both survived." I nodded, unable to speak. That was the family story, the Christmas miracle. "There are no miracles," Mrs. Calloway said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the table like a gunshot. "Only exchanges, only sacrifices, and tonight, 40 years later, the debt is due." She held out the plate of turkey to me. "Eat, Lucas, or should I call you by the name I gave you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, refusing to dissipate. "Should I call you by the name I gave you?" I stared at Mrs. Calloway, Evelyn, trying to find a trace of insanity in her eyes that would allow me to dismiss this entire evening as the delusions of a lonely, grieving woman. But there was no madness there, only a terrifying, crystal-clear lucidity. I pushed the plate away, the smell of the roasted turkey suddenly revolting. "My name is Liam," I said, my voice harder than I intended, a defensive wall going up. And my mother's name is Margaret. She is in a nursing home in Florida. I don't know what kind of sick game this is, or how you dug up my family history, but I'm leaving. I scraped my chair back, the harsh sound echoing in the silent house. I started to stand, but her voice stopped me cold. It wasn't a shout. It was a soft, melodic hum. She was humming a lullaby. Hush now, baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. It was a tune I knew. Not just a generic nursery rhyme, but a specific variation, a hummed pattern with a peculiar dip in the melody that I had hummed to myself my entire life when I was anxious. I had never known where I learned it. Margaret, the woman I called Mother, never sang. She was a practical, stern woman who believed music was a distraction, yet here was this stranger, humming the soundtrack of my subconscious. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. "Sit down, Thomas," she said gently, using a name I had never heard but which resonated in my bones like a struck bell. "You can't leave. Not before dessert. Not before you see the proof." She reached under the table and pulled out not a pie or a cake, but a worn, leather-bound box. It looked like a doctor's satchel from the last century. She placed it on the table between us, pushing aside the crystal gravy boat. The leather was cracked, smelling of dust and time. "Open it," she whispered. "Block 4 is about discovery, isn't it? The moment the world tilts." I didn't know what she meant by Block 4, perhaps a reference to her own internal organization of this trauma, but I obeyed. My hands shook as I undid the brass clasp. The lid creaked open. Inside there was a chaotic archive of a life interrupted. There were Polaroids, their edges yellowed. There were cassette tapes, and there was a hospital bracelet, tiny, designed for a newborn's wrist. I picked up the bracelet. The plastic was brittle. The ink was faded but legible. Baby Boy Calloway, Deck 24, 1984, 11:42 p.m. I looked at my watch. It was currently 11:40 p.m., 2 minutes to the anniversary of my birth, or my death. I picked up the first Polaroid. It showed a young woman, undeniably Evelyn, stunningly beautiful, with wild hair and fierce eyes, holding a baby in this very room. The Christmas tree in the background was identical to the one currently standing in the corner. In the photo, a man was leaning over her shoulder, kissing the baby's head. The man was my father, Robert. He looked happier than I had ever seen him in real life. In my memories, my father was a distant, melancholic figure, a man who lived in the shadows of my mother's dominance. But in this photo, he was radiant. "He loved me," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with the weight of 40 years of silence. "We were going to run away. That Christmas, he had the tickets. We were going to Paris. He was going to leave Margaret. She couldn't give him children, you see, and she was difficult, cold. But he was a man of duty, and she held the purse strings of his family business." I flipped through more photos. Robert and Evelyn in the snow. Robert painting the nursery upstairs. This wasn't a fling. This was a life, a parallel life that had been severed. "So what happened?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "If he loved you, if I am your son." Why did I grow up with her? Why did I grow up thinking I was the miracle child of a barren woman? Evelyn reached out and touched the cassette player inside the box. "Because miracles are expensive, Thomas, and Margaret was very, very rich." She pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment, the sound of 1984 static filling the room. Then voices. Clear, sharp, undeniable. "It's the only way, Robert," a woman's voice said. Margaret, younger, sharper, terrifyingly calm. "Think about the scandal. Think about the company. If you leave with that whore, I will destroy you. I will bury you in litigation so deep you'll never see the sun. But there is an alternative." A pause on the tape. Then my father's voice, broken, sobbing. "She's the mother, Margaret. She won't give him up." "She doesn't have a choice," Margaret's voice replied. She has no money, no family. And you have a gambling debt, don't you, Robert? A significant one. I can make that go away. I can give the boy a future, Harvard, Yale, the life he deserves, or he can grow up in a trailer with a woman who waits tables. Choose. The boy needs a mother. I will be that mother. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was louder than a scream. The great discovery wasn't just that I was adopted, it was that I was purchased. My father hadn't just abandoned me, he had sold me to save his own skin and his reputation. And Margaret, the woman who raised me, who criticized my grades, who pushed me to succeed, who constantly told me how lucky I was. She was the architect of this tragedy. She had bought a child to fix a marriage that was already dead. I looked at Evelyn. Tears were streaming down her face, tracking through the deep lines of age. "I didn't want to sell you," she choked out. "I fought them. But they told me. They told me I was unfit. They threatened to have me committed. Margaret had doctors on her payroll. They said I was hysterical, unstable. They said they would take you to the state orphanage if I didn't sign the papers. I thought if I let Margaret take you, at least you would be safe. At least you would be with your father." She reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine, afraid to make contact. But she didn't let him be a father, did she? She punished him every day for his infidelity. And she punished you for being the evidence of it. And my mind was reeling, recontextualizing every memory of my childhood. The coldness between my parents, my father's drinking, the way Margaret would look at me sometimes, not with love, but with a strange mixture of possession and resentment. I wasn't her son. I was her trophy. I was the proof that she had won the war against the mistress. "Why now?" I asked, the anger rising in my chest like bile. "Why tell me this now? Why did you wait 40 years? Evelyn stood up slowly. She walked to the window, looking out at the house across the street, my house. "Because I'm dying, Thomas," she said simply. "The doctor gave me 2 months, pancreatic cancer. I have no time left for secrets. And because—" She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "Because last week I saw you carrying a box out of your house, a box of old letters. You were throwing them away." I nodded. I had been clearing out clutter. "I went through your trash," she confessed, no shame in her voice. "I found them, letters from your father, letters he wrote to me but never sent. He kept them hidden in the attic of that house. You didn't know what they were. You thought they were just junk." She pulled a stack of envelopes from her pocket. "He didn't sell you because he wanted to, Thomas. He did it because he was weak, but he wrote to me every Christmas Eve. He told me about your first steps, your first word. He told me you liked to draw. He told me he missed me." This was the twist. The irreversible shift. My father wasn't the villain I had just painted him to be in the last 5 minutes. He was a prisoner too. The villain was the silence. The villain was the carefully constructed lie that Margaret had built around us like a fortress. And I had been living across the street from my own mother for 6 months, treating her like a stranger, while she watched me through the window, starving for a connection she had been denied for 4 decades. The Christmas dinner that never happened wasn't just about tonight. It was about 40 Christmases stolen. It was about the life that should have existed in this warm, cluttered house, instead of the cold, sterile mansion I grew up in. I looked at the empty chairs again. Robert, Evelyn, Thomas, the family that never was. "You set the table," I said, my voice cracking. "You set it every year." "Every year," she nodded. "I cook the roast, I make the stuffing, I pour the wine, and I wait. I pretend that 1984 went differently. I pretend that Robert came back, that he brought you home, and we sat down to eat as a family." She looked at the clock. Midnight. "Happy birthday, Thomas." Something inside me broke. The dam that I had built to hold back my own loneliness, my own sense of not belonging, shattered. I stood up and walked around the table. She looked small, frail, vibrating with the energy of her confession. I didn't know how to be her son. I didn't know how to undo 40 years of being Liam, but I knew I couldn't leave her standing there alone. Not tonight, not ever again. I reached out and took her hands. They were cold, rough, shaking. "I'm not Thomas," I said, tears blurring my vision. "I don't know who Thomas is yet, but I'm here. I'm the one who is here." She looked up at me, her face crumpling, the stoic mask finally falling away. She let out a sob that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest since the Reagan administration. She collapsed into me, her head hitting my chest, her small frame shaking with violent, racking sobs. I wrapped my arms around her. It felt awkward at first, like hugging a stranger, but then the smell of her, lavender and old paper, triggered a sensory memory buried so deep in my amygdala it felt like an electric shock. I remembered this smell from the very beginning, before the lies, before the money, before the separation. I remembered being held. "I missed you," she wailed into my shirt, her voice muffled. "I missed you every single day. I counted the days. I counted the hours." "I'm here," I whispered back, resting my chin on her grey hair. "I'm here." The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of grief, raw and ugly and beautiful. We stood there in the dining room, under the watchful eyes of the portraits, two survivors of a war I didn't know I had been fighting. The food on the table was cold, the candles were burning low. But for the first time in 40 years, the chair at the foot of the table wasn't empty. The ghost had become flesh, and as I held the woman who gave me life, a new emotion surged through the pain, a burning, white-hot need for justice. Margaret was in Florida, thinking she was safe, thinking the past was buried under checkbooks and NDAs. She was wrong. The dinner was over. The reckoning was about to begin. I pulled back slightly, looking into Evelyn's wet eyes. "You said you have letters?" I asked. "Hundreds," she said. "And you have the tape?" "Yes." "And you have me?" She touched my face, tracing the line of my jaw. "I have you." I looked at the phone on the sideboard. "Then let's make a call," I said. "I think it's time Margaret heard from her son and her sister." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Sister? She's not just the woman who took me, is she?" I guessed, the final piece of the puzzle locking into place. The way she spoke on the tape, the resentment, it was personal. She hated you because you were everything she wasn't. Evelyn nodded slowly. "She is my older sister. We haven't spoken since that night." "Well," I said, picking up the phone and handing it to her, "it's Christmas. Families should talk." The phone rang 3 times. In the stillness of the dining room, the electronic trill sounded like an alarm clock, waking us from a long, dark dream. Evelyn stood next to me, her hand gripping my forearm, her nails digging into my skin. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was anchored. I held the receiver to my ear, listening to the connection click open thousands of miles away in Palm Beach. "Merry Christmas, Liam," Margaret's voice came through the line. It was brisk, performative, layered with the artificial cheer she reserved for holidays and charity galas. "I assume you're calling to apologize for ignoring my messages all day. I've been telling the Davises about your promotion, and they were asking why you weren't here." The banality of it almost made me laugh. She was constructing a narrative for her friends, while her reality was burning down in a snowy house in the suburbs. "I'm not in the city, Margaret," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Oh, did you go to the cabin?" "No, I'm at number 42. Silence. A vacuum of sound so complete I could hear the static on the line. The ice in her glass clinked in Florida. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her tone shifting instantly to that sharp, warning frequency I knew so well from childhood, the tone that meant stop talking. "I'm at the dinner table," I continued. looking at the roast turkey, the 6 empty chairs that were now metaphorically filled with the ghosts she had created. "The table is set for 6. For Robert, for you, for Evelyn, for me." "Liam, you've been drinking," she snapped. "Go home. We will discuss this in January." "Her name isn't Mrs. Calloway to you, is it?" I asked, looking at my mother, my real mother, who was watching me with wet, wide eyes. "It's Evelyn, your sister, the one you erased." "She is a sick woman," Margaret hissed, the veneer cracking completely. "She is a liar and a manipulator. Whatever she told you, it's a fantasy. She's been unstable since 1980. She seduced your father, she ruined our family, and I saved you from her poverty. I gave you a life, Liam. I gave you everything." "You gave me a transaction," I corrected. "You didn't save me, you bought me." I hit the speakerphone button. "She's here, Margaret. Do you have anything you want to say to her? It's been 40 years. This is your last chance." Evelyn leaned toward the phone. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just whispered, with a dignity that filled the room. "I forgive you, Maggie. Not for me, but for him. I forgive you for being so unhappy that you had to steal someone else's joy to feel full." The line went dead. Margaret had hung up. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, the severance of the tie, the end of the lie. The next 2 months were not a montage. Life, unlike movies, doesn't gloss over the details. It was a slow, deliberate accumulation of moments. I moved into number 42 that night and never really left. I took a leave of absence from work. I told them it was a family emergency. I didn't tell them it was a family discovery. We had 64 days. That was the number on the calendar from Christmas Eve to the morning she didn't wake up. 64 days to unpack 40 years. It wasn't enough, but it was everything. We spent the days going through the doctor's bag. We read every single letter my father had written. I finally met the man Robert was, not the shadow I grew up with. He was funny. He was poetic. He wrote about the way the light hit Evelyn's hair. He wrote about his regret, a regret so deep it eventually stopped his heart. I realized that I was the product of a great tragedy, yes, but also of a great love. I wasn't an accident or a mistake. I was desired. We cooked. Evelyn taught me how to make the stuffing, the real way with the chestnuts. We sat in the garden wrapped in blankets as the snow melted and the first crocuses of spring pushed through the hard earth. She told me about her childhood with Margaret, how they had been close once, before jealousy and money drove a wedge between them. She humanized the villain. She refused to let me carry the hate. "Hate is drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, Thomas," she told me one afternoon, using my birth name. She called me Thomas when we were alone. To the world, I was still Liam, but in that house I was Thomas. Margaret has to live with herself. That is punishment enough. The physical decline was hard to watch. The cancer was aggressive, a thief in the night stealing her energy, then her mobility, then her appetite. But it never took her mind, and it never took her eyes. Those blue eyes remained fixed on me, drinking me in, memorizing my face as if she were trying to take the image of me with her to the other side. On the last night, a storm was brewing. The wind was howling around the eaves of the Victorian house, just like it had on Christmas Eve. She was in a hospital bed we had set up in the living room, surrounded by the portraits she had kept dusted for decades. I sat by her side, holding her hand. Her skin was paper thin. "Did I do a good job?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You did the best job," I said, choking back the sob that was living permanently in my throat. "You waited. You never gave up." "I set the table," she smiled faintly. "I always set the table. And I came," I promised. "I came home." She squeezed my hand one last time. "Don't let the dinner get cold," she breathed. And then the grip loosened. The breathing stopped. The house fell silent, but it wasn't the empty, terrifying silence of before. It was a peaceful silence, the silence of a promise kept. The funeral was small. I didn't invite Margaret. I didn't have to. She sent a lawyer with a wreath of white lilies and a generic card. I left the wreath on a bench outside the cemetery. Only a few neighbors came, people who had watched the crazy lady at number 42 for years, but never knew her name. They offered condolences, whispered about how sad it was that she died alone. She didn't die alone, I corrected them, standing by the open grave, the cold wind whipping my coat. She died with her son. The shock on their faces was satisfying, but it didn't matter. The truth wasn't for them. It was for us. I inherited the house. The will was simple. Everything to my son, Thomas Liam Calloway. It caused a legal firestorm with Margaret's estate, of course. She tried to contest it, claiming Evelyn was mentally incompetent, but I had the tapes, I had the letters, and I had the DNA. Eventually, Margaret settled. She retreated into her fortress of wealth, and I never spoke to her again. I didn't need to. Her punishment was her own solitude. Fast forward, 11 months later, Christmas Eve. The snow is falling again, blanketing the cul-de-sac in white. From the outside, number 42 looks much the same as it did last year. The paint is still slightly peeling. The hydrangeas are sleeping under the frost. But inside, everything has changed. I stand at the window looking out, but I'm not looking across the street at my old life. I'm looking for guests. I turn back to the room. The mahogany table is polished to a shine. The crystal glasses are sparkling. The candles are lit, casting that warm amber glow that once broke my heart from a distance. The table is set for 12. I didn't set it for ghosts this time. I didn't set it for the family that couldn't be. I invited the neighbors, the old man 3 doors down who lost his wife in July, the young couple who just moved in and don't know anyone, the nurse who helped care for Evelyn in her final weeks. I'm using Evelyn's recipe for the roast. The smell of sage and roasting meat fills the house, chasing away the shadows of the past. The doorbell rings. It's a bright, cheerful sound. I walk to the door, passing the portrait I hung in the hallway yesterday. It's the Polaroid of Evelyn, Robert, and baby Thomas. They are smiling. They are together. I open the door. The cold air rushes in, but the warmth of the house pushes it back. "Merry Christmas!" The neighbors cheer, stamping snow off their boots, carrying bottles of wine and pies. "Come in," I say, smiling, a real smile, one that reaches my eyes. "Come in, everyone is waiting." The moral of the story isn't just about secrets coming to light, it's about the definition of home. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect family, the return of things we lost. We set tables for ghosts because we are afraid to feed the living. Evelyn spent 40 years waiting for a memory, and in doing so, she taught me the value of presence. She couldn't save the past, but she saved me. She taught me that family isn't just whose blood you carry. It's who sits at your table when the rest of the world has gone cold. It's about who waits for you. I look at the head of the table. I left one chair empty, not for a ghost, but for a guest of honor. I placed a single white rose on the plate. This dinner is for her. And finally, it's a dinner that is actually happening. So here is my question to you tonight. Look at your table. Look at your life. Are you setting a place for a regret? Are you keeping a seat warm for someone who chose to leave? Or are you ready to open the door to the people who are standing right outside in the cold? Secrets rot. Truth heals. But connection is the only thing that keeps us warm. Don't wait 40 years to cross the street. Don't wait for the letter. Make the call. Open the door, because the snow covers everything eventually. But until it does, we have to eat. I'm Liam. And this was the story of the dinner that finally happened. If this story made you think of someone you need to call, don't wait until midnight. Do it now.